I'm Trina. Welcome to my cucina. Today we are making gumbo. This season on the Trina Cucina podcast, each episode we're tackling a new dish from a different cuisine type. And our first one that we're tackling in season 2 is gumbo. So let's talk ingredients, tools, and then let's make some gumbo. Okay, today we're cooking Emeril Lagasse's chicken and smoked sausage gumbo recipe from the Food Network with a few minor modifications. As we say on the podcast, this is a really great one for people just getting started. And the wonderful thing about gumbo is it's really kind of whatever you want. So learn the basics and then tweak and adjust to what you want. For equipment, you really only need like a cast iron Dutch oven like this or a large heavy bottomed cast iron stock pot. You can do it with a regular stainless steel stock pot, which I tried, and it's just much easier to burn your roux. Then when at the very end of this, after like 3-ish hours, you're gonna need a small pot with a lid for your rice, a skillet, some sort of a spoon. I'm gonna recommend pulling your hair back, grabbing a glass of water because you're gonna be in front of the hot Dutch oven for 20 to 25 minutes. We'll call it the comfort station. So that's really about all you need. The first 2 things you're gonna need is about 2/3 cup to 1 cup oil. This is my first modification. When I've done 1 cup oil, it gets a lot liquidier, a lot more liquidy, and I decided to bump that down to like 2/3 cup. I'd seen a couple other recipes where they do that. And 1 cup flour, all-purpose standard flour. That's what you're gonna need right out the gate. But then it's really important to have about half of this stuff prepped and ready to go. If you're type A, you're totally gonna appreciate this, but have this ready to go. That way you can just grab it and put it in. You will not have time to chop because when you're making the roux, which is just oil and flour or butter and flour, but in this case oil, you need to stir constantly. So you're gonna have to be ready with the next ingredients. Then it's the Holy Trinity: onions, bell peppers, celery. I added in a little bit of garlic. He doesn't have it in this recipe, but I think you can never go wrong with a little bit of garlic. And then next you end up throwing in 6 cups of chicken stock or other sorts of stock, whatever you have on hand, and then some andouille sausage. If you don't have andouille, you can also use a Polish kielbasa. On the podcast, Bob mentioned he really likes a turkey sausage for lower fat content. So you'll need that. And then a bit of salt, cayenne, and some bay leaves. This is really what you need for the first half. This will all take probably about an hour, hour and a half to come together. Then you'll throw in some like dark meat chicken, like boneless chicken thighs, cut up and then put with some Cajun seasoning. I made Emeril's rustic rub and put it in our own little container and shook some of that on there. So I'll go put the chicken in the fridge. However, while this all cooks, you could take that time to then chop up your chicken and put the rub on it. And then towards the last 15 minutes, I like to throw in some frozen shrimp. If you are lucky enough to have access to great fresh shrimp, you could probably throw it in a little bit later, but I do 15 minutes with the frozen shrimp at the very, very end. And then you'll also want to start your rice at about that time. The first time I made gumbo, I didn't have this plain, like long rice. So I just used a little bit of jasmine rice is what I had on hand, and that worked just fine. Any long grain white rice will work, but otherwise it's plain white rice. And then the very last things you add are green onions, parsley, and a little bit of gumbo filet. We don't use okra in this recipe. Okra is has like a thickening component to it. So instead the filet, which is a sassafras leaf ground up, provides that thickening. Okay, time to actually make this roux. This is the most important part of the show. You're gonna stand in front of this guy again for 20 to 25 minutes, so get comfortable, pull your hair back, pull your sleeves up, get some water, get a little rest for your whisk ready, and let's make a roux. Okay, so at this point you wanna make sure that you're on medium heat as you're warming up your, like I said, heavy bottomed, enameled cast iron, Dutch oven, stock pot, whatever you have that's got a nice heavy bottom. Make sure you're getting it nice and warm. And like I said, you can do this in stainless steel, but you're going to have to be extra careful. All right, so add your oil. Let that go in. And again, it's typically a 1-to-1 ratio of either oil or butter. Typically oil in a lot of cases, and flour. I did 2/3 cup, but you can also just do 1-to-1, especially as you're learning and trying. I believe some people like to get the oil nice and hot before the flour. I haven't noticed a big difference yet, but if you feel strongly about that, feel free to leave that in the comments. We can have a discussion about it in the comments. But this is where it all begins. Whisk in that flour, try to get in all those little nooks and crannies. And you're just going to keep doing that for 20 to 25 minutes till you get that perfect chocolate brown color. Okay, at this point we're 5 minutes in, and like I said, it's just whisking. You're not going to see too much color change here just yet, but you will, and it just takes patience. And this is what I learned, is you basically cannot step away. Even seconds, the roux can burn and start to get really clumpy, and then there's no salvaging it. You just start over. So keep going, whisk away. That's all you got to do. Okay, we're now 10 minutes in, and we're starting to see a little bit of a color change, but just keep whisking, getting all different dimensions and areas, capturing all the flour, all the oil. Just keep going. Okay, we're 15 minutes in now. You can start to see the color is definitely changing. Now, I did go about 20 minutes here, and you'll see it in a few seconds, but this is where you really, really, absolutely cannot step away. Even though you couldn't step away before, you really can't now. So just keep whisking, keep paying attention to it. Like I said, make sure you're getting all dimensions of the pot, and keep going. We have now hit 20 minutes, and it's a great chocolate color. So I'm going to go ahead and first start by adding the onions. Let's get all those onions added in, give them a stir. They're going to steam up, so make sure you watch your hands. There's some sugars in the onions which will release really quickly. Get those guys in there. This is also about the time when I switch spoons. Yep, there it is. Switch to the wooden spoon for easier stirring. And then pretty quickly you'll want to have your green peppers and your celery on deck to go in next. Let's get these guys added in. Stir, stir. Get them nice and coated with all that good roux goodness. Now you're going to add in the celery and the bell peppers. And I did forget to mention in the intro that if you have an Abita beer or any other sort of Southern Louisiana beer, that would be a great thing to consume during your roux making. And definitely right now at this point, when you've successfully made a roux and adding your Holy Trinity, give yourself a congratulatory drink of your beer there. So yeah, go ahead and get those guys in. Stirred, coated, and cooking for a couple of minutes. Like I think it's about 5 minutes here for them to soften just a bit. Here's where I add in the garlic. You can use your own expertise here, but this is just the point I toss it in after you get all of your Holy Trinity incorporated and softened a bit. I add a lot of the Holy Trinity. I maybe added a little more than the recipe calls for. So it's a little thick here, but it's okay. Now it's time for your andouille sausage to go in. We actually smoked our own this time. At Whole Foods, we grabbed the uncooked andouille sausage and smoked it ourselves. I don't know that it was significantly better, but it's kind of fun to experiment with different types of sausage. You also throw in your bay leaves, your salt, and a little bit of extra cayenne here. Stir, stir, stir. Use the pot holder for preventing burns on your hand, obviously. This is the point where you're going to add in your stock. Now you can make your own stock. I just used chicken stock here, but I watch videos of ladies making their own seafood stock and using the chicken themselves or even duck stock. So anything that's going to give you a lot of really good flavor, use that. And then you want to stir here and make sure it's blending in with the roux really nicely. When I made this in the stainless steel pot, I had trouble at this step, but every time I've made it in the enameled cast iron Dutch oven, had no trouble here. And you can see you're starting to get this really nice sort of brownish color, kind of beautiful, beautiful color emerge. And now you're going to let this guy hang out for about an hour. Throughout the time it simmers, which right now it's just your first hour, you're going to need to stir to make sure it doesn't stick to the bottom. So just be sure you're stirring. Go on and check it every now and then. It's also going to start to smell really good, so if you happen to have fresh bread on hand, which we did, this would also be a time to do a quick little taste test. It was good, trust me. Now here is where you're going to add in your chicken that you've put the rub on. So this is after the first hour of simmering. So you've still got another 2 hours to go after this point. But you've added in your chicken, you're going to stir it, and then you're going to want to make sure in those 2 hours that you come back and stir it and make sure you really rub your spoon along the bottom to make sure it doesn't stick. It's going to smell really good too. Okay, now in those 2 hours when you come back to it, you're going to start to see this fat creeping along the top of it. If you can scrape it off, that's what they recommend doing. If you don't, you're just going to end up with like fat on top, which isn't the end of the world, but yeah, here scraping along the bottom, make sure I'm getting it all. But the fat, just watch for it and see if you can scrape it off. Okay, at this point we've got like 15 to 20 minutes left in our simmering. So I'd started the rice water, putting in the rice. I'm going to let that go for 15 to 20 minutes. Let it simmer. Yep, turn it down. Now this is a good point to try to, if you can scrape a little bit of that fat off. Good. And in the podcast, like Bob mentioned, the turkey sausage might be the way to go. Scraping the fat off does get really tricky because you don't want to like put chicken in the compost or the garbage or any of the good like Holy Trinity. So it's hard to get just the fat. That's the tough part. You can do your best to try to scrape it off. Okay. At this point, you're going to want to add in the shrimp. I just do the frozen shrimp that I have, which doesn't have tails or heads or anything else on it, but that would definitely add more flavor yet. Go ahead and toss those in, stir them up, and let it cook those last 15 minutes. Okay, we have shut the heat off, and we've added in our filet powder, the green onions, and the chopped up parsley. So you're just going to stir that in. Again, you've got the heat off. Get that nice and mixed up. It already looks really, really good. And the smell is just absolutely incredible. One thing his recipe does not include, which is Tabasco sauce and also Worcestershire sauce. I'm not exactly sure where you would add those, but at any point I would say go ahead and throw those in and do that to taste. All right, it's time. Okay, we are finally ready to eat some gumbo. It's been probably about 4 hours since we started, so definitely do this on a weekend day when you have time and patience. All right, so we have our gumbo, the shrimps, and I pulled out the bay leaves. Lastly, right before now, we added the sassafras, the filet powder, and the green onions and the parsley. So now we'll put some gumbo in our bowl, and then I like to put the rice on top. I just think it looks a little bit nicer. It smells so good. And then a scoop of the long grain white rice on top. Looks so good. We also sometimes eat it with bread and then dip the bread in. All right, I'm gonna give it a little go. It is really hot though. Oh my God, it's like really, really good. I'm not an expert. There's all kinds of ways to make gumbo, and I think as soon as you start making it and liking it, tweak it and adjust it to what works for you. Because dang, this is good and it's totally worth the time and the effort. All right, I better go, or I think my boyfriend's going to freak out if we don't eat this soon. All right, thanks for watching, and I will post some links to the podcast if you're curious to hear more discussion about gumbo. Thanks.